Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today is Memory Lane Monday with Dad. Had to remember that. So this is my dad, Bob, and today he's going to share with us one of his stories from early childhood.
Well, I believe Amber told you about when I was born. It's in 1937, which was a few days ago. And of course, between that time and now, Second World War and others have passed by, but many of y'all don't recall much about Second World War as I do, because even though I was very little, I was 5 years old when it began. And I was living in the city then, and so when I got to be about 6 and 7, my aunt had given me a little red wagon, and I would go around the neighborhood and collect pots, pans, things like rubber tires, newspaper, take them to the junkyard, and for a wagon full of junk and newspapers for the war drive, I'd get 50 cents, which I thought I was living, even though, excuse me, I gave it up to my folks. But also, I remember a lot of going to the store to get groceries, and you could get groceries, some of them, but you had to have war stamps. So I'd be given a book of stamps, and the grocer would take out what you needed. Like, for instance, most meats you could not get except bologna. And others were so rationed people could not afford them. When it came to things like milk, you could forget it, because all milk was being condensed and sent overseas to the soldiers. So if women had small children, or like myself at that time, who had to have milk, you were going to get condensed milk, a half a glass of condensed milk and a half a glass of water, which made a full glass of milk.
And what about sugar and butter?
Sugar you could get, but it was very hard to get, because like now, it is refined and everything, and in several forms. But back then, it wasn't all refined and everything. It came straight from the sugar fields in Mexico and below the border and everything. And you had to have almost a whole sheet of stamps to get 2 pounds.
Wow.
And you could not come back for a month.
So a lot of conservation.
And when things like cigarettes, that was out, because all cigarettes went overseas to the GIs.
Wow.
And
And do you remember how you got news of the war at that
yeah,
time?
I had my aunt had a old Philco radio that stood off the floor, and you could get all over. It was a shortwave radio,
Mm.
And if you could listen in between the static, you could hear Lord Haw Haw, which gave all the propaganda of how well the Germans were doing.
Mm.
And then Edward R. Murrah, when you could get an English station, would tell you basically how our boys were doing, which at the first part of a few years, like 41 through 43, something like that, they were doing fair, but a lot of them were being killed. They weren't talking much about the concentration camps and things like that. That wasn't heard of until, in the late 50s and 60s, when Dwight Eisenhower, General, had made the liberation over there. But though I wasn't really that much aware, I didn't even know what war was. I was too young. And here I was just a growing up little kid and I was straight off a farm. I was a hick, so to speak. And I knew that things were hard to get. There was no such thing as throwing things away. Anything you got in a tin can, it didn't go in the trash. It got rinsed and it's sent to the junkyard. Even women's lipstick cases were used to make bullets.
Wow.
And compacts were used to make mortar shells and things like that. You could not get flour because flour was used to make explosives like dynamite. There was so much you could not get rubber tires for automobiles. If the tires you had on your car, if you had a car, and you got it flat, you were just out of luck because rubber went overseas. And then a real treat was like when I was about, I guess, 10, 11 years old, was when my brother and I, we would get a whole $1 and each, and we'd get to go walk 7 blocks up the street to go to the movies. It was a double feature then for a quarter. And let's see, we'd leave the house about 10:30, something like that, get in the theater about 12. We could get a big box of popcorn for 15 cents.
Wow.
A Coke for a nickel, and we still had change, but we'd pocket it, get into the theater, we'd watch 2 full moving pictures, a cartoon show, and coming previews, and by the time we'd get out, it'd be dark.
Wow.
And we'd run across the street to a hamburger shop. It was called Little Tavern. I don't believe they have any of those anymore. They do have White Tower, I think, around now.
White Castle.
White Castle, rather. But they serve the same things, was these tiny, they call them sliders now, hamburgers for a nickel. Well, we had enough to I'd get 5 hamburgers And my brother would get, instead of hamburgers, he liked their milkshakes. And he'd get 5 milkshakes, because milkshakes only cost a nickel then.
Oh my, that sounds like a stomach ache.
And we had, with that, because we bought so much, we were allowed a glass of water.
Mm.
Well, we were down all that and we weren't really full. As far as we were concerned, we just enjoyed a big Saturday. We got home, it would be almost 7 o'clock. And my aunt would say, okay, wash up, it's dinner time. So we'd pull up to the dinner table and we'd have a 3-course meal. And of course, 3-course meal during wartime nowadays would seem kind of sparse. Mm-hmm. But you figure, after eating all the chunks of the food that we had during the day, that we would be full, but we were kids and it burned it all up real fast.
Do you remember any of the names of the movies you saw?
Yeah, well, most of the time on Saturdays, they'd have cowboys movies or something like The Green Hornet was one, Flash Gordon, Damon Runyon, A Spy Detective was another, Boston Blackie, and then of course Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and but none of the real, of course, I guess the theaters couldn't afford having the real good movies because weren't made until later. Mm-hmm. And but now one of my favorites is a movie that was made in '39 and is Gone with the Wind. Of course, I didn't really get to see that until, I was an adult in later years, and I still enjoy seeing it. But it was through all the, I said I didn't even know what war was. Well, as I got older and there came the Korean War and Vietnam and the 6-Day War and then the war in Iraq and everything. It got to be something that was going on that you almost, because we were so safe and had freedom, you started taking for granted until you got to be an adult, and then you thought how fortunate we are.
That's right, exactly. Well, we will wrap it up there for this week. Thanks for sharing. And if you like these, please subscribe and comment below, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night. Bye-bye.